Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's now 10:04, so I would suggest that we all take our seats, delegates, especially invited guests, so that we can begin. So on behalf of my co-chair, Annie, and myself, I would like to welcome you to the preparatory segment of the 37th meeting of the parties to the Montreal Protocol. On a personal note, it is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here with all of you again as we seek to advance the work of protecting the ozone layer and the climate in this beautiful country of Kenya. On behalf of everyone attending the meeting, I would like to thank Kenya for the warm and beautiful welcome that this country has afforded us today and for the week ahead. I now invite the Executive Secretary of the Ozone Secretariat, Ms. Meg Seki, to make her statement. Meg, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, and ozone friends, welcome to the 37th meeting of the parties here in Nairobi. First, I would like to take a moment to remember Cornelius Rhine of the European Union, who passed away only last week. We are very deeply saddened by this unexpected, untimely loss for the ozone family. Cornelius was admired for his professionalism, warm enthusiasm, and unwavering commitment to ozone layer and environmental protection. For over 2 decades, he played a key role in the Montreal Protocol process and in strengthening the global cooperation under the Montreal Protocol, including in the negotiations and implementation of the Kigali Amendment, as well as participating in the Implementation Committee as President, Vice President, and Rapporteur. And more recently, he has been supporting the EU-funded project as a member of the Steering Committee to expand regional atmospheric monitoring to fill the observational gaps and strengthen global capacity to track emissions. Cornelius will be missed by many of us and remembered by all of us here with respect and gratitude. Let us observe a minute of silence. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Distinguished delegates, welcome to Nairobi once again. The last time you were here was for the 35th meeting of the parties in 2023. At that meeting, the highest ever replenishment of the multilateral fund was agreed. The vital work on replenishment continues, this time on the terms of reference for a study on the replenishment for the next period, which is 2027 to 29. Based on this study, a replenishment decision will be taken next year. In the informal meeting yesterday, you began discussions on strengthening the Montreal Protocol, a conversation that is continuing since 5 or 6 years ago and reflects the unwavering commitment of this community. I trust that the discussions were useful yesterday and that parties have come up with clear ideas on how to transform that dialogue into concrete steps at this MOP. You made very good progress in Bangkok earlier this year at the OEWG in Bangkok in July, yet some challenges remain. Agreeing on the terms of reference for the replenishment study is one of them. Several other issues, such as feedstocks, halons, proposal addressing concerns about the growing banks of refrigerants, and regional initiatives that support Kigali Amendment implementation are also challenges at this meeting. In Bangkok, we heard the presentation by the co-chair of the advisory group of the Vienna Convention General Trust Fund for Research and Systematic Observations, as well as the Secretariat, on the progress with the implementation of the activities on atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances. Further updates on the identification of suitable locations and potential sites, as well as on the work on refining cost estimates for establishing a monitoring stations will be presented at this MOP. Closing the gap in atmospheric monitoring is a big step in further strengthening the ozone treaties. I hope that parties are planning to forge ahead and build on the progress. These efforts remind us that science remains the backbone of our success. Another science issue coming up at this meeting is the emissions of HFC 23. Both the SAP and the TEEP will present their updates, and their insights will provide an opportunity to demonstrate that the Montreal Protocol remains agile and responsive to emerging threats. Dear delegates, in the broader context of the changing geopolitical climate, multilateralism faces growing challenges. Financial uncertainties and shifting policies and priorities are the realities that we are facing and must navigate. The United Nations, including UNEP, has embarked on assessing its operations to improve efficiency, reassert the value of multilateralism, and to reinforce efforts to respond to today's global challenges. In line with UNEP's efforts, the Secretariat has also been taking steps to be prudent with our expenditures, saving funds where possible, but at the same time, working harder than ever with less staff in order not to compromise the effectiveness of the Montreal Protocol. This treaty is a beacon of hope, proof that global cooperation works. We are determined to keep that light shining. So with that, dear delegates, the work ahead this week will be demanding. Some discussions will be long and consensus may seem elusive. But remember that the ozone treaties have thrived because of your unity, your resolve to reach compromise, and your vision. So thank you very much, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
I would like to thank you, Meg, our Executive Secretary, for that very concise but clear statement to us, encouraging us to keep the momentum going and not to let our national, regional, and global challenges set us back or detract from the work that we need to do going forward. So as mentioned by Meg, we made steady progress at OEWG 47. While there is still much work for us to do, we hope that discussions in Bangkok will serve as a good foundation for our negotiations here in Nairobi. Let me now turn the floor over to my co-chair for the next agenda item. Annie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chantel, and good morning to everyone. Agenda item 2 deals with organisational issues, and we will start with agenda item 2A on the adoption of the agenda of the preparatory segment of this meeting. The provisional agenda for the preparatory segment is contained in document 37/1, section 1, and the annotated agenda is in document 37/1/add1. On the 30th of October, the Secretariat received a request from the State of Palestine to defer agenda item 14 on the classification of the State of Palestine as an Article 5 party to next year's MOP. I therefore propose that we do defer this agenda item to MOP 38. Now I would like to open the floor to see if delegates would like to make any other changes or add items to the provisional agenda. If delegates have any specific items they would like to raise under agenda item 16 on other matters, I request that they please raise them now. You can request the floor by pressing the speak button in front of you, and of course I will give the floor to delegates in the order in which requests are registered. So now I open the floor for any comments or changes proposed to the proposed agenda. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Let me just start by expressing our appreciation to the Ozone Secretariat for the excellent work that they have done, preparing us once again for a meeting of the parties. And thanks to both of our co-chairs for what we know will be the excellent work they will continue to do to move us through our deliberations. The United States, as a general matter, we are okay with the adoption of the agenda. I have two brief points that I did want to raise. First, to say that we are comfortable in concept with deferring agenda item 14 for future consideration. We wish to restate our view reflected at OEWG 47 that this agenda item includes a discussion on the classification of Article 5 parties more generally as we set out in July, and that's our understanding on how this will move forward. Second, to note, which you just raised, Co-Chair, that we are planning to raise under the other matters agenda item the issue of optimizing the Montreal Protocol meeting schedule and associated Secretariat support. We think it's important for the MOP to keep this under consideration, whether our current schedule and length of meetings is best serving the needs of the protocol. And while we do not anticipate that delegates are prepared to have a thorough discussion of this issue here, we are planning to support circulate a draft CRP for a short decision to ask the Secretariat for additional information for next year. So I'd ask the co-chairs to include this as part of agenda item 16. With that, I thank again our co-chairs and look forward to working with colleagues on some productive discussions this week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. I now have China and the State of Palestine wishing to take the floor. China, you have the floor.
谢谢主席女士。这是中方第一次在本次大会发言，我愿借此机会对臭氧秘书处和肯尼亚政府 对此次大会所做的周到安排表示诚挚的感谢。主席女士，关于第14项议程，我们愿发表以下意见。蒙特利尔议定书的成功立足于坚定不移践行多边主义，特别是缔约方始终坚持平等相待、团结合作，摒弃政治化做法，来源于落实共同但有区别的责任原则。特别是议定书第5条，赋予发展中国家履行宽限期，提供资金和技术支持。中方始终秉持这一精神，坚定支持巴方有关诉求。盟约大家庭一个都不能少。中方呼吁秘书处及有能力的缔约方继续为巴方解决履约方面实际困难提供协助，推动巴方早日归为议定书第5条发展中国家缔约方。此外，针对刚刚个别缔约方提出关于巴勒斯坦议题涉及到其他更广泛的问题，中方并不认同。我们希望各缔约方聚焦议题本身，秉持务实态度开展有益讨论，而非强行讨论不相关内容，甚至将本议题政治化。谢谢主席女士。
Thank you very much, China, for your observations. I now turn the floor to the State of Palestine. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, and good morning to everyone, Madam Executive Secretary. As you have rightfully indicated, Madam Co-Chair, that in regard to the agenda item 14, titled Official Classification of the State of Palestine as a Party Operating under Paragraph 1 of Article 5 of the Montreal Protocol and access to support from multilateral fund that was supposed to be considered in this meeting. I wish to confirm that confirm our request for the deferral of the consideration of this agenda item to the upcoming MOP. Since the very important discussions that have taken place during the open-ended working group in Bangkok, our delegation has been considering very seriously all matters and concerns reflected by several parties. And in the spirit of constructive engagement and consensus building, we have decided to make this request, for allowing for additional time to allow for more substantive preparations and consultations that can achieve the needed consensus on the matter. My delegation is also deeply grateful for all the delegations who have already expressed their support to our request, and we shall continue to work with them and all parties on this matter. This request is a reflection of our commitment to the Montreal Protocol and eagerness to step up our efforts to join the other parties in our collective responsibilities and aspirations. In conclusion, Madam Chair, I confirm that the State of Palestine wishes to officially request the deferral of agenda item 14. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, State of Palestine, for providing that additional information. On my list now, I have Poland, I have Libya twice, and then I have Israel. So I now give the floor to Poland. Poland, you don't wish to seek the floor? Okay, I now turn the floor to Libya. You have the floor. Libya, did you wish to take the floor?
Yeah, thank you. We can leave it at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Libya. I turn the floor now to Israel. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair and Madam Co-Chair. We would like to take this opportunity and thank the Secretariat, Co-Chairs, and the Government of Kenya for their warm hospitality. Israel wishes to maintain and reiterate its general observations and reservations it previously noted on matters related to Agenda Item 14. Thank you.
Thank you very much, delegates. I do not see any other country wishing to take the floor. So in light of the observations that have been made, I propose that specifically the comments that have been made in relation to agenda item 14 be well reflected in the report of the meeting to register those views that have been made, and that under agenda item 16, we would add the issue of optimising Montreal Protocol meetings as per the request of the US. If there is no objection to that way forward, I see no one wishing to take the floor. We will proceed in that manner. Thank you very much. So now we turn to agenda item 2B, which is in relation to the organisation of work, and present the order and timing of how we hope to move through the agenda today and for the rest of the preparatory segment, which is scheduled up until Wednesday. The proposed order of work for the rest of the morning follows the sequence of items as presented in the agenda of the meeting, and that is being shown on the screen at the moment. The issues which were already discussed at OEWG 47, we expect to be able to move through pretty quickly, since parties had agreed to continue consideration of these matters during this preparatory segment. And we will establish contact groups to continue the discussions that's here in Nairobi that started at the OEWG. The slide which is about to be projected now shows the proposed organisation of work for this afternoon. Thank you. As you can see, we are just following the order of the agenda. And then the next slide will show the organisation of work for tomorrow morning. So you will see that we hope to finish going through the agenda by lunchtime tomorrow. Contact groups and informal groups will be established as necessary. We will try to avoid contact groups and informal groups meeting simultaneously, except for the Budget Committee, which, as usual, will continue, which will meet in parallel, no doubt, with other groups. We hope that Tuesday afternoon and all of Wednesday will be devoted to contact groups and informal groups. While some groups may not conclude their work by Wednesday, they may need to meet in parallel with the high-level segment, but we will try and limit the number of groups, these groups, to a minimum. Continuing negotiations beyond Wednesday will require closure of the preparatory segment at some point during the high-level segment. On housekeeping matters, as usual, our sessions will run from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. In the morning, and then from 3 till 6 p.m. In the afternoon. Participants are encouraged to attend side events that will take place during the lunch breaks and in the evenings as contact groups permit. The schedule of the plenary, contact group and informal group meetings will be projected on the screens in this room after every plenary session and announced on screens around the venue and on the meeting portal and on the mobile app, which I hope everybody has now downloaded. Please direct any meeting room requests to the conference officer, Ms. Nadia Omar, whose name is now on the screen, and submit conference room papers as soon as possible to Ms. Yui Zhu, and her email address is also on the screen. CRP submitted before the lunch break on Thursday will be translated and available in the official UN languages. Documents submitted after this time will only be available in English. Please feel free to visit the Secretariat Help Desk, located outside the meeting hall, for any help or information. Now, as part of the organisation of work, I will briefly go through the work that needs to be done in preparation for the high-level segment. In relation to agenda item 2A of the provisional agenda for the high-level segment, nominations for the President and other members of the MOP37 Bureau are needed by Wednesday at the latest. And you can see on the slide the groups from which the various roles need to be selected. Please make your nominations to Pablo by the end of Wednesday. In relation to statements by heads of delegations during the high-level segment, they are expected to start on Thursday afternoon. The time limit for each statement is 5 minutes maximum. Requests for heads of delegation to speak should be submitted to the help desk outside the hall, and written statements would be appreciated to assist with interpretation. Submissions to be made by email and are to be sent to Jacqueline, and you can see her email on the screen there as well. Finally, credentials are to be submitted to the help desk as soon as possible, and by the end of Thursday afternoon plenary session at the very latest, for review by the new MOP37 Bureau on Friday morning. Are there any observations in relation to the organisation of work? I hope that is clear. The organisation... I need the gavel. My script says to gavel. So the organisation of work is agreed. I would like to thank you for your patience as I ran through it. And I now turn the floor over to Chantal for the next agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. I would like to invite parties to turn to sub-item 3A on the budget of the Trust Fund for the Montreal Protocol and financial reports. Parties will recall that we review and adopt on the budget of the Montreal Protocol each year. The financial reports of both Montreal Protocol and the Vienna Convention Trust Funds are reviewed every year. In keeping with our practice, we would like to establish a budget committee to review the proposed budget and the financial reports and prepare a draft decision for the consideration of the parties. The documents containing the information required for the discussion are indicated in the slide on the screen. These documents were posted in the meeting portal 3 months before this meeting for parties to review. So the Budget Committee can have a good start with all those materials available online. We would get back to you in terms of the co-facilitators for the budget, and as soon as possible, we would like this committee to meet. I would like to ask the committee to start its work with a meeting at 1:45 p.m. today in Conference Room 6 on this level. We are allocating the same time and room for the committee to meet every day of the week and at other times as necessary. We note that the Budget Committee may meet in parallel, as Annie said, with contact groups and informal groups. And we apologize for that, but thank you very much for your flexibility as this important committee intends to do its work. I now move to agenda item 3B, consideration of the membership of the Montreal Protocol bodies. MOP37 needs to decide on the membership of the Implementation Committee and to endorse the selection of new members of the Executive Committee of the Multilateral Fund and the co-chairs of the Open-Ended Working Group for 2026. The screens show the positions that need to be decided on. As usual, the agenda slides, including those shown on the screens now, are also available on the meeting portal. So, if you have not yet done so, we urge you to initiate consultations in your groups and provide your nominations for the Montreal Protocol bodies and send the names to Mr. Pablo Moscoso as soon as possible and on Wednesday at the latest. His email address is indicated on the slide. The placeholder decisions for the membership of the Implementation Committee, the Executive Committee, and the co-chairs of the OEWG are contained in the draft decisions document PRO.37/3, and as draft decisions 37 and 37/CC, and 37 with placeholders, so respectively. The blanks in the placeholder decision will be filled in by the Secretariat as nominations are received, and the draft decisions will be forwarded to the high-level segment for adoption. To facilitate and increase the transparency of the nomination, selection, or election processes, the Secretariat will be posting the nominations for the various positions in these bodies on the MOP37 portal and will be announcing updates on a regular basis during this meeting. Thank you. Moving along, I now invite parties to turn to Agenda Item 4 on the terms of reference for the study on the 2027 to 2029 replenishment of the Multilateral Fund. At OEWG 47, the parties began to discuss the terms of reference for the replenishment study. Following the parties' initial discussions on the matter, Australia, Canada, Japan, and the United Kingdom put forward a draft decision on the proposed terms of reference. This draft decision, with the entire text square bracketed, as well as the previous decision on the terms of reference for the replenishment study for 2024 to 2026, became the basis of discussions in a contact group. Due to time constraints, the contact group could not conclude its work. Parties agreed that they would resume discussions at MOP37. The revised draft decision is set out in the draft decision document PRO.37/3 as a draft decision 37 with a placeholder number. To be efficient, I would like to suggest that we establish a contact group right away and resume the discussions in that contact group. I propose that Ralph Beerman of the Netherlands and Azra from Bosnia and Herzegovina be the co-chairs for this contact group, continuing from OEWG 47. Thank you. I now hand over to my co-chair, Annie, for the next agenda item.
Thank you very much, Chantel. We are now looking at agenda item 5 on HFC 23 emissions. In paragraph 5 of decision 36.3 on HFC 23 emissions, the Scientific Assessment Panel and the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel were requested to update their decision 35.7 reports on HFC 23 to reflect any additional or new information that had become available and to submit their reports to this meeting. In addition, the TEEP was requested to provide information on and a comparison of best practices and guidelines relating to measuring, estimating, reporting and verifying HFC 23 byproduct emissions and their destruction. In response to this request, the SAP and the TEEP coordinated and produced individual reports, which you will find on their website. And a brief summary, as well as the executive summaries of the reports, can be found in the addendum to the Secretariat's note for this meeting. I would like to now invite the SAP and the TEEP to come to the podium to present their reports, please. While they're making their way to the podium, I would like to remind parties, or to actually let you know, that these presentations have been posted on the meeting portal under the Presentations tab, and all other presentations to be made at this meeting will be posted on the same page. The SAP and the TEEP will have an allocated time of 15 minutes each for their presentations. So the SAP will speak first. So can I ask the SAP to make their way to a microphone and to provide their presentation? Thank you, SAP.
Welcome, good morning, delegates, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss the HFC 23 update report from the Scientific Assessment Panel in response to decisions 36/3 to reflect any additional or new information on emissions of HFC 23 that became available. I'm here to present on behalf of the lead authors, Steve Monsker and Jim Burkholder, and the co-authors, who are the other SAP co-chairs. We'd also like to acknowledge contributions and assistance from the TEEP, including its MC TOC and the Multilateral Fund and the Secretariat, and also important contributions from the scientific community, including the A-Gauge Global Atmospheric Monitoring Community. So this report is based on new information that has become available since publication of the SAP 2024 HFC 23 report, published about a year ago. including an extended global atmospheric measurement record by 1 year through 2023, new laboratory studies reflecting magnitudes of atmospheric production of HFC 23, the 2025 TEEP report in response to Decision 36/3, an updated reporting of production, generation, and emission of halocarbons, including HFC 23. And I will say up front that the fundamental conclusions in this report, based on this additional information, remain unchanged from last year. This plot shows that updated abundance measurements of HFC 23 in the remote atmosphere provided by A-Gauge, so a continued increase through 2023. The measured mean global abundance is now 36.8 parts per trillion, which represents about 15% of the contribution from all HFCs to direct radiative forcing to the Earth's atmosphere in 2023. So these emissions of HFC 23 are a significant issue for climate. This increase in the global abundance was slightly lower between 2022 and 2023 at 0.97 parts per trillion than the previous year, which actually in turn was slightly lower than the year before. Recall that HFC 23 has a long atmospheric lifetime of 228 years, so even if emissions decrease in the atmosphere will respond, even if emissions decrease, the atmosphere will respond only very slowly to that decrease. And this gas also has the highest 100-year GWP of all of the HFCs of 14,700. Global HFC 23 emissions in 2023, derived from measured atmospheric abundances, totaled 14.2 kilotons per year and were 2.7 kilotons per year, or 16%, lower than peak emissions derived for 2018 to 2019 of 16.9 kilotons per year. These emissions in 2023 were similar to emissions in 2022 of 14.4 kilotons per year, and in fact the 2023 estimate is within the uncertainty of the 2022 estimate. The small change in emissions from 2022 to 2023 contrasts with the larger annual decline from 2019 to 2022 that averaged 0.8 kilotons per year. And this period was after the first reductions in HFC production and consumption, which occurred under the Kigali Amendment. We note here that reported HCFC 22 production for all uses, which remains the largest known source of HFC 23 byproduct, was 1.9% smaller in 2023 compared to 2022. In 2023, the difference or gap between atmospheric derived, shown in blue, and reporting-based expectations, shown in red, and reporting-based global total emissions was between 11.4 and 12.8 kilotons per year. This is similar to the gap in 2022 of 10.5 to 12.5 kilotons per year. The overall time evolution of the gaps is unchanged from the 2024 report. Apologies, we have a slight gap with our technology. Oh, sorry, back to, yes, thank you. This gap is not reconciled by considering all known sources beyond HCFC 22 production. So in fact, so what you see here in the plot are the atmospheric derived emissions in blue, the reporting based emissions in red, and the TEEP estimates from all known industrial sources in the dash box, which they will soon present. So the spread in the y-axis of this dash box represents the uncertainty of these estimates of all known industrial sources, which they will soon present. So this emissions gap from all known industrial sources and reported abatements, the emissions from all known industrial sources and reported abatements sum to 1.6 to 3.7 kilotons per year in recent years. So it's clear from this data that there remains a very large gap between top-down and bottom-up data, which remains essentially the same as last year. Doesn't work. Oh, okay, thank you. As reported in the SAP 2024 HFC 23 report, breakdown of some fluorinated gases present in the atmosphere that have a particular chemical structure can produce HFC 23. Shown on the right-hand side are some examples of such gases, which include HFCs, HCFCs, and HFOs. Last year, SAP estimated an upper limit of 0.44 kilotons per year from atmospheric oxidation. There is some new scientific information which allows us to be more accurate and precise in this calculation with a new upper limit of 0.22 kilotons per year. This accounts for only around 1.5% of the 2023 atmospheric-derived emissions, so a negligible amount. We note that actually the actual value could be substantially smaller. Coming now to how the emissions gap has evolved over time. So in this plot, the black line shows the HFC 23 emissions gap. And you can see that remained very small over more than 20 years, up to 2014, showing good agreement in this period between reporting-based expectations and atmospheric-derived emissions. As mentioned in an earlier slide, the overall time evolution that you see here of this gap is unchanged from the 2024 report and unchanged from the SAP presentation last year. We just have one more year of data now. So this earlier period, prior to 2014, includes substantial destruction of HFC 23, as shown by the yellow symbols, mostly in China, which was facilitated and verified through UNFCCC's Clean Development Mechanism, or CDM projects. The increasing emission gap between 2015 and 2018 coincided with increases in reported abatement of HFC 23 from a limited number of A5 countries, as shown in red on the plot. After 2019, the emission gap increased to a high of 15 kilotons per year and has decreased since then to 11 to 12.5 kilotons per year in 2023. At the same time, reported abatements from A5 countries, shown in red, and in all countries, shown in blue, increased after 2020 to a value of 23 kilotons per year in 2023. Now considering emissions of HFC 23 relative to HCFC 22 production. Recall that the ratio of total HFC 23 emissions from all sources relative to HCFC 22 production for all uses, or E23 to P22, provides an insight into the overall effectiveness of HFC 23 emissions mitigation associated with HCFC 22 production. The red line in the plot shows the E23 to P22 ratio, where HFC 23 emissions are derived from reported data. The blue line is using atmospheric-based emissions of HFC 23. Concentrating on the time period shown in the circle, the decrease in the emission gap after 2019, which was shown on the previous slide, is concurrent with a declining ratio of emissions derived from global observations relative to reported total HCFC 22 production. That E23 to P22 ratio calculated for 2023 is 1.1%, and that is unchanged from 2022. And just to note that that ratio is about half of what it would be if all HFC 23 directly associated with HCFC 22 production was released to the atmosphere, but remains substantially larger than expected based on reported abatements and emissions, which you can see in the red line. So next slide, yeah, let's go backwards. Okay. So we now look at updated regional emissions of HFC 23. Our understanding of regional contributions to global HFC 23 emissions remains incomplete because of gaps in atmospheric monitoring. The sum of all available observationally derived regional emission estimates accounted for only 6.1 kilotons per year of HFC 23 in 2023, or 43 plus or minus 10% of global emissions in that year. Those regions are shown below and are comprised of Eastern China, Republic of Korea, Northwestern EU, Western Japan, and Australia. And between them, these countries accounted for the majority, so 93%, of HFC 23 generation in 2023, with China alone accounting for 79% of the HFC 23 generation. Eastern China emissions during 2022-2023 were smaller than the peak value derived for 2019 of 8 to 9.5 kilotons per year. I should say that, yes, in this 2023 report, we benefit from an extended record of atmospheric measurements at the Gosan Korea Station to extend emissions from Eastern China past 2019. And those Eastern China emissions during 2022 to 23 were smaller than the peak value derived for 2019 of 8 to 9.5 kilotons per year. In 2023, emissions from Eastern China was 4.7 kilotons per year, greater than the 0.9 kilotons reported to the Ozone Secretariat for all of China in that year. So a total from Eastern China of 5.6 kilotons per year in 2023. This unexplained emission from Eastern China of 4.7 kilotons accounts for 40 plus or minus 10% of the global emission gap in 2023. Next slide. Oh, yeah. This updated record from Gosan is consistent with a mean emission during 2021 to 2022 derived for the same region based on high-frequency HFC 23 measurements at a southern Chinese station. So it's shown as the blue symbol with the uncertainty bar on that plot. Slide. In the next plot that's about to come up. Keep going. Here we go. This is the symbol that I was drawing your attention to. Okay, next slide, please. So, atmospheric derived emissions are available from other countries, as listed here. So Australia, Belgium, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, France, Germany, Japan, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Republic of Korea, and the United Kingdom. The sum of these emissions in recent years totals 0.5 kilotons per year, which is still higher than the reporting from those countries or parties by a total of 0.4 kilotons per year. So this emission counts for 2.2 to 4.5% of the recent global emission gap. Atmospherically derived HFC 23 emission estimates remain unavailable in the Kigali era for the countries accounting for the remaining reported HFC 23 generation during 2023. So these countries are Argentina, India, Mexico, the Russian Federation, and the United States of America. So to summarize, a substantial shortfall remains in our understanding of global emissions of HFC 23 derived from measurements in the remote atmosphere, despite the new information provided in this supplemental report. The gap between reported emissions and those inferred from atmospheric abundances is between 11.4 and 12.8 kilotons per year. The gap between emissions from all known sources, estimated by TEEP in 2025, and from atmospheric oxidation is between 9.6 and 13.3 kilotons per year. The sum of all available observationally derived regional emission estimates account for only 6.1 kilotons per year of HFC 23 in 2023, which is 43 plus or minus 10% of global emissions in that year. Eastern China accounted for 5.6 kilotons of the available regional emission totals in 2023. These emissions were substantially larger than reported and account for about 40% of the global gap. 10 other countries accounted for the remaining 0.51 kilotons of the regional emission totals. These emissions are substantially larger than reported and account for 2.2 to 4.5% of the global gap. A regional scale accounting of global emissions remains incomplete, as atmospherically derived HFC 23 emission estimates remain unavailable after 2019 for the countries accounting for the remaining reported HFC 23 generation during 2023. Those countries are listed there. So in summary, the bottom-up estimates, including atmospheric oxidation, can only account for about 20% of the emissions that the atmosphere is telling us are there. And diagnosis of this issue is hindered by the fact that the regional emissions summed make up only 43% of the atmospheric global total. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I hope delegates are able to access the presentation on the presentation portal, because I think Lucy went through it quite quickly, and it might require a little bit more consideration at some stage. I'd now like to ask the TEEP to come forward to give its presentation, and we will come back to questions and answers and discussion after the TEEP has made its presentation. Thank you very much.
Morning. I'm Takeshi Eriguchi, co-chair of MC Talk. MC Talk has led the HFC 23 report for TEEP, and Nick Campbell will present the report on behalf of TEEP.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates, the first thing I'd like to do is remind you of the decision that you gave us last year, which we have provided this response for. There were 4 main paragraphs, and you can see the first 2 paragraphs, 3 and 4, referred to information that you were providing as parties to the Ozone Secretariat, and the other paragraphs requested that we actually updated our previous decisions on 23 to reflect the new information that had become available, and also to provide information and a comparison of the best practice and guidelines relating to measurement, estimation, reporting and verifying emissions of 23. Under paragraphs 3 and 4, we had 5 submissions from parties, China, European Union, India, Japan, and the United States of America. And under paragraphs 5 and 6, we've addressed the requests to TIAP in this report. What I'm going to provide in this presentation is an update of our previous report on HFC 23 under decision 35.7. In the 2025 TIAP response to last year's decision, we have provided a comparison of the best practices and guidelines relating to measuring, estimating, reporting and verifying HFC 23 byproduct emissions and their destruction. I'm not going to cover that in this presentation because it is somewhat detailed, but it is well worth the read. We have, as you're aware, produced a number of reports on HFC 23 already, and the primary one was the MC Talk 2022 assessment report, and this was then followed up by a report in 2023 in response to your decision 35.7 on strengthening institutional processes with respect to information on 23. And then we provided another response to 35.7 on emissions of 23 last year. Ashley? I just thought I would, for the sense of it, detail a bit of background, just go back a few steps and note that there are several chemical mechanisms that can generate HFC-23 as a byproduct in chemical production processes. The three that I've put on this slide are: you can get an over or under reaction of chemicals present in the reaction vessel. In other words, 23 becomes an overfluorinated HCFC-22 in the process. You can also find feedstocks in a process, impurities in the feedstocks, and hence you can get a chloroform impurity in the methylene chloride feedstock that's used to produce 32, and you can get hydrofluorination to 23. And then, of course, you can get, as you can in any chemical process, unintended side reactions, and this can happen in the production of 125, HFC 125 from perchloroethylene, and you can end up with very, very small quantities of 23 in that process as well. If we actually look at the quantities of 23 by country and by sector, the information on consumption is actually not very available. It's certainly not readily available in the level of detail that you would like, and in fact I would like, in response to the decision, particularly by country and by sector. And certainly prior to 2023 and the ratification by the majority of parties of Kigali, it's very difficult to find the data on consumption and feedstock. It's just not available. There are some data available from other sources which talks about the quantities used in some of the applications, and where possible, we've actually used that. Carrying on from that, 23 is produced and consumed for feedstock, and separately in very small quantities for some emissive uses, such as in the fire suppression industries, for very low temperature refrigeration, and also in the semiconductor and electronics manufacturing. And there are a few parties that actually manufacture Annex C Group 1 or Annex F substances, and what they do is they actually capture the 23 that they generate, and then they store this and use it for feedstock or for emissive uses, or in some cases they capture it and then they actually send it for destruction. The next number you see is a very broad number, and I have to confess it's an embarrassment to say that the global consumption is between 1,000 and 10,000 tons, but because of confidentiality reasons in the reporting, we can't actually narrow that number legally. So that is the best we can offer on the actual consumption. Having said that, there has actually been an increase of consumption of 23 in the period 2021 to 2023. For feedstock, we see 707 tons has been reported for use of 23. For fire protection, it is a very small level, and in fact, it's insignificant virtually compared to the use of HFC 227EA. Again, a very small level quantity is used in low temperature refrigeration. The level that actually is increasing in use, I should say that we do not have information on how the emissions are increasing. The level that's increasing in use is in etchant and chamber cleaning in the semiconductor and electronics industry. We've seen an average growth rate of 15% in that industry, and although, because the industry does not actually have to report, it does in some countries, but generally there is no international reporting. We've only got data through to 2020, where the level sold into that industry was 720 tons. And I have some informal estimates now that say it's probably between 1,000 and 1,200 tons in that industry. So if we actually look at the updated estimates on the 23 generated and also the emissions from fluorinated gas production facilities, what we've actually used in the methodology is we've used the Article 7 data on quantities of 22 produced and the 23 that are emitted. We've used data on the quantities of 23 generated from F-gas production that the parties kindly report on a voluntary basis. I have not, of course, published these by party in the report because, again, they are considered as confidential. The Secretariat has published on its website the data that are actually not confidential, and you can find that quite easily on the website. The 23 generation data is not reported by all the parties that actually produce 22, but it is by the majority of them. So what we've done is we've applied estimated 23 byproduct generation rates to the Article 7 reported 22 data to give us an idea of how much 23 is actually generated as a byproduct. And I should stress again, this is generated 23, not emitted 23. Very, very important difference in concept to note. And the emissions that are defined as the total 23 emitted from a facility that generates HFC 23 as a byproduct after any abatement. So if we finally get down to some numbers, we'll see that the 22 production that you as parties reported on for 2023 was the number you can see, 1,174,751 tonnes. And if you actually take that number and apply a 1.5 or 3% HFC generation rate, the estimate would be we would get 18,000 to 36,000 tonnes of 23 generated from the 22 process. And this is actually very consistent with the numbers that you as parties have reported on a voluntary basis. If you look at the reported data, you'll see that without abatement, the generation has been reported as 24,376, so a 2% generation rate. So it fits nicely in the estimate that we actually did from our technical knowledge. If you actually look at the emissions data that you have reported as party, you'll see there that we have 959 tonnes that you have said that you've admitted. So that would be a 0.08%, 23 per tonne of 22 manufactured. So what we've actually done now is we've updated the emissions of 23, and we've provided that in our report, including from facilities that manufacture the Annex C Group 1 or Annex F. And we had already done a lot of this work in the September 2023 TAP report. And what we've done is we've added the best estimates of 23 emissions from all the sources that we actually know, and where possible updated that information in the report from September 2023. I should say that a lot of the data you will see in the table, if you can actually read the table, which I think you may have to read it in the report, a lot of the information is a very broad estimate, are very broad estimates, where we do not have further information to actually improve the accuracy of these numbers. The main number in the table that you can see, the two main numbers that are worth focusing on, is you've got the 959 tonnes that you, the parties, have actually reported, and then the rest are estimates primarily from 2023 or 2024, depending on how we've actually uprated the estimate. If we go straight to the next slide, Ashley. But the bottom line is that our estimate as TAP of the 23 emissions from known emission sources are between 1,600 and 3,700 tonnes per year, and this has been basically over recent years. And adding to that, you've got an estimate by SAP of the potential additional source that is coming from atmospheric oxidation, and that's less than 220 tonnes a year in 2023, and of course we've not included this in our data. What this brings attention to, though, and the message to this meeting is no different from the message that Lucy has given from the SAP report on this area, and that is you are comparing the 1,600 to 3,700 tonnes to the atmospheric observations that SAP has measured of 14,200 tonnes for 2023. We cannot explain this difference by uncertainties, as you can see from the uncertainties in the table, in the slide, in atmospheric derived estimates, or from the data reported under Article 7 or other sources. We cannot explain this difference. So looking at a bit of a summary, our number that we have reported, the bottom-up number is 1,600 to 3,700. The top-down number from SAP is 14,200. We believe as TAP we've identified all the major sources that are likely to contribute most of the HFC 23 emissions, and we've outlined these in detail where we can in the report. We do not believe that there are any unknown sources that our experts have not found that are likely to bridge the large difference between the TAP bottom-up and the SAP top-down estimates. And I just thought I would finish by re-showing the slide that Lucy showed for SAP, because I feel that summarizes our joint work extremely well, and that's that a substantial shortfall remains in our understanding of the global emissions of 23 that are derived from measurements in the remote atmosphere, despite the new information that SAP has provided in the supplemental report. We can see that the gap between the reported emissions and those inferred from the atmospheric abundances is something of the order of 11.4 and 12.8 kilotons per year. And the gap between the estimates from all the known sources that we have found as TAP and from atmospheric oxidation is between 9.6 and 13.3 kilotons per year. We can't answer any further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, TEEP, and Nick in particular, for presenting the work of the TEEP on this important issue. So we will move to a question and answer session now. If delegates have observations or statements they would like to make, please save those for later. Now is just a question and answer session. And since TEEP is already at the podium, I propose that we first of all open the floor for any questions to the TEEP on its report. So if delegates would like to ask any questions from the TEEP, please press the buttons and make your intentions known. First of all, I have a quick request for the floor from Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan, you have the floor.
No, Tunisia, s'il vous plaît. Please.
Tunisia, thank you.
Okay. شكرا سيد الرئيسة. في بداية هذه الكلمة يود وفد بلادي أتقدم بجزيل الشكر إلى الحكومة الكينية على حسن الضيافة وأمانة الأذون على حسن تنظيم هذا الاجتماع كما توجه بشكري لفريقي الساب وتيب على إعداد التقريرين المحيرين الخاص بانبعاثات مركب HFC 23. تمت الإشارة في تقرير الساب فريق التقييم العلمي عن مصدر انبعاث HFC 23 والممثل خاصة في تأكسد مواد الهيدروفلوروكربونية HFC عن طريق التفاعل الكيميائي الضوئي فوتوكيمستري. في الوقت الحالي فإن هذه الانبعاثات تعتبر ضعيفة نسبيا مقارنة مع بقية المصادر، ولكن السؤال المطروح ماذا عن التطور المستقبلي لهذه الانبعاثات عن طريق هذا المصدر، أخذا بعين الاعتبار وأن مواد HFC لها فترة حياة في الغلاف الجوي مرتفعة نسبيا. مع الشكر.
Thank you very much, Tunisia. I think the team will actually take a stab at answering your question, but before they do that, I would like to give the floor to Senegal for its question. Thank you.
It is a mistake, please.
Thank you, Senegal. That is perfectly fine. Are there any other delegations wishing to ask the TEEP any questions about its report? I now see the United States. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. And as you noted, we'll confine our questions to the TEEP for the time being and ask our additional questions to the SAP later. So maybe just one initial specific question. Did the TEEP do any specific work looking at emissions from lines that intentionally manufacture HFC 23? And by that I mean, so I don't mean lines whose primary purpose, for example, is to produce HCFC 22 or HFCs, but actually the primary product for sale is HFC 23. So is the TEEP aware of any such lines? And if so, have they made any estimates of emissions from those lines? They may be in this line I see in their chart that relates to other fluorochemical manufacturing, which is less than 300 kilotons per year on the chart, but I just wanted to understand that. And if they're aware of any such lines, if they could share any information that they have about them, their abatement technology, et cetera. So that's the first question. Second question, this is sort of a crossover between the report of the TEEP and the report of the SAP. But something dramatic happens in 2015 is what I infer from the SAP report. So what the atmosphere is showing us begins to wildly diverge around that time relative to what has been reported. So I have a couple specific questions about that for the SAP that I'll come back to, but I guess a broader question for the TEEP. So around that time, so you've got your chart here that shows all these sort of different estimates of HFC 23 emissions, from impurities to feedstock use to electrochemical fluorination. Yep, we can talk about the 0.004 kilotons from impurities. But you've got sort of a whole list of things there that you think are the areas that 23 emissions come from. So around the year 2015, from the perspective of those or any other significant sources of HFC 23, are you aware of any industries that dramatically changed around that time, such that you would have expected sort of a catastrophic increase in HFC 23 emissions? Because I think the root of this discrepancy and the quote emissions gap, there didn't used to be an emissions gap. It appeared at a particular point in time. And we'll get back to this when we come back to the SAP, but I think the question for TEEP is, did something momentous happen at that time that could have accounted for this dramatic discrepancy that we see that was created at that time and persists to this day? Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States, for those two very specific questions. I'll take a question or questions from Canada, and then I'll turn over to the TEEP for their responses. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and glad that you're allowing me more than one question. But I see TEEP is shaking their heads. Well, first of all, let me thank the Ozone Secretariat for the organization of this meeting and Kenya for the warm welcome, and in this beautiful city of Nairobi and conference center where we see monkeys and all kinds of other wildlife. I know you said that we should only ask questions, but I wanted to know if I can at least convey my appreciation to the Technology Economic Assessment Panel for their report. I mean, their work is very much appreciated. We're conscious that every year we're asking them to continue to dig into this issue, and they continue doing that, and in a very professional and informative way. So we appreciate that. We have three questions. One is, given that, as you mentioned, reporting on HFC 23 generation is voluntary. You said that some of that is not being reported, but you feel confident that you can make estimation based on the 22 production. I guess that's being reported, and you have access to that. Just to know approximately, I mean, what is the percentage of HFC 23? What is the percentage of parties, let's say, that are not reporting, HFC 23 generation as part of the total? The second is, and this may also be a question more for the SAP, but are you aware? I mean, I assume that everything that we know about HFC 23 emission comes from atmospheric monitoring stations, but are you aware if there's any sort of fence line monitoring at specific facilities where they would be able to capture the specific emissions coming from that facility? We have seen such reports before, but not specifically related to facilities that had HFC 23 emissions, facilities that had other kinds of emissions, and was just wondering if this kind of information is available. But as I said, it may be more a question from the SAP, so don't feel you have to answer it. And the final question, we noted the information that was provided by parties in the TEEP report on their methodologies for estimating, reporting, and verifying HFC 23 emission. We note that the TEEP did not try to compare or make any observations with regards to that information. And we were wondering if that's because you felt you didn't have a mandate from the decision to do that, so you just felt you could only reproduce what was submitted, but not provide any kind of comparative analysis or possible observations. And if it's something that, you could possibly be able to do if there's enough information there, and perhaps by following up with some parties, if you would be able in the future, for a future report, to distill a little bit more of that information for us, compare the different methodologies, and perhaps come up with some overall, conclusions or observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. I turn now to the TEEP to answer those questions from Tunisia, USA and Canada.
Thank you very much for the extremely interesting questions. I'll try to deal with them in order, and if I don't deal with them satisfactorily, please ask them again or ask me outside of the forum, which would be much easier, I think, for us to make progress. I will cheat and answer the Tunisian question, although it's really a SAP question. I think the bottom line is you ask us about the atmospheric oxidation and whether this would in the future be a much greater problem. Well, the levels that have been put forward after an extensive analysis by our SAP colleagues are extremely low. You're talking low hundreds of tons. And it is certainly, having talked with the scientist that's done this, it is assumed that this will increase in the future, given that some of it is from the breakdown of some of the HFO and HCFO alternatives. But he felt at the time that it was not going to be an enormous increase because the levels are actually very low at the present moment, and it would be a very slow increase. But I'll leave Lucy to add more to that, as they are the experts. I'm not the expert on that. I've just had conversations with people on this. Going to the questions of the US, we have been told informally that there is at least one, potentially two, plants that specifically manufacture HFC 23. We have also been told informally, and hence this is not in the reports to any extent, that the levels they produce are in the hundreds of tons levels as opposed to the thousands of tons levels, because they are being aimed at specific market areas. So I think that it is only a few hundred tons. I have no information on whether or not they actually have abatement on those facilities whatsoever. If I move on to the second question from the United States, and that was, did anything dramatic happen in 2015, which means that we saw what is an enormous increase in the atmospheric levels of HFC 23. As far as we are concerned, from a technical point of view, and from the knowledge of one of our experts who is a researcher into fluorspar, which is basically the raw material used to generate the HF, which is used to generate the fluorocarbons, he has not seen any new industries that have sprung up that would result in such an increase in the emissions of 23. The only dramatic thing that happened, and again, you can only look at whether this is a coincidence or not, is that effectively the UNFCCC, the Climate Change Convention Clean Development Mechanism process stopped in 2015. A number of countries a specific region had banned the use of HFC 23 credits in their climate change law, and as such, the price of the HFC 23 credits dropped from what I think was probably about $15 a ton to about 10 cents a ton. And that somewhat, let's just say, destroyed the market, is the best description. Whether that is part of the reason that we then had an increase in 23 in the atmosphere can only be speculated, and it's not my job to speculate. I'm on a technical panel. That is your job as delegates. So that is the only dramatic thing that we saw. The thing that we're looking at, and I want to look at more just to inform you, is I want to have a look at the 23 emissions from lithium-ion batteries, because we know that very, very small fractions of 23 is generated from lithium-ion batteries. There's been, to my knowledge, at least one scientific paper. So we need to actually have a look at that just to confirm it is only a low-level source, not a few thousand-ton source. Coming to the questions from Canada, I've written down here, HFC 23 reporting is voluntary. Well, the answer is yes. Sorry, that wasn't a question. My apologies. You ask if there was details of monitoring at specific facilities. Well, I think Stefan Ryman, who was sitting beside Lucy, can talk about the work he did at Dordrecht, and that it was very site-specific. I think that is the only study that has been done, but Stefan will be able to talk to that on the SAP. You said that we didn't do a comparison. What I did was I broke down the information you gave us into 5 or 6 and actually tried to put that in a table so you could look at it. The problem with doing a comparison, which I did not feel capable of doing on the grounds that all the information we received from those countries actually complied with the UNFCCC guidelines for reporting fluorinated gases, which meant that, as far as I could see it, every submission I got was actually state-of-the-art. It was horrendously detailed, and I felt comparing it would be unfair on the countries that had kindly submitted, on the grounds that they gave me their best and they were doing their best, however subtle the differences were, with response to the guidelines themselves. So I felt that if countries that were producing 22, generating 23, wanted to look at them, they could see the areas are detailed and say, oh, that actually does look slightly better. But I was struggling to see where each was better. They were different, but I was struggling to see where they were better. My apologies, I've been told what the first question was. The percentage of parties not reporting. I don't have the numbers in front of me, Philippe, I'm very sorry, but I think it was something like 90+% of the production of 22 the parties had actually reported. But I could actually have a look at my numbers on the spreadsheet and tell you that. I know I worked it out. I'm embarrassed that I can't remember it.
Thank you very much for those responses. I hope they are satisfactory to the parties. I don't see any other party wishing to take the floor at this stage. Of course, as soon as I say that, there are a couple of parties wishing to take the floor. So I'll now turn again to the United States and then to India. So United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Just very quickly to thank the TEEP for those clarifications, very helpful, and more broadly, I should have thanked you for your report, so I will do that now. I neglected to do so earlier. Maybe just a quick follow-up question on these facilities that intentionally produce HFC 23. So it's a bit of a curiosity to me. So I mean, the one specific, maybe two specific questions. One would be, are these swing, so you're talking about a plant, I hear you saying you're talking about a plant that may only produce a couple hundred tons of material a year. Are these swing plant, they must be producing, I'm just wondering how the economics works on that. If you surely can't run a plant making such a small amount of chemical. Are these swing plants? Are they producing other things? Do you have any information on that? And also, where are these facilities located in terms of what country? Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. I turn now to India. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Just a small clarification we would like to seek from TEEP. Considering that there had been refinement which was made in the last COP with reference to the data reporting format for the countries, we would like to understand from them whether there are still some uncertainties which are left in the data relating to HFC 23 that is being reported by the parties. And if there are those gaps which are there, I think what is required to be done is that the formatting that is being that the format that is being shared with the parties and the report that we are expecting from the parties, I think we can further go for some kind of revision or amendment in those formats to avoid this gap that we are discussing today here in this meeting. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, India. So a quick follow-up question from the United States and then India, and then we might close this question and answer session for the TEEP and turn to the SAP. Nick, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, United States, for the question. I think the answer is that, as I said, I just have informal information on this. I was told that it was a small, specific semi-tech unit, the one that I've heard of, that was able to produce 23, and only 23, but it was a semi-tech plant. Obviously, for confidentiality, I'm afraid I cannot say where we believe it is, or where I was informally told it is. As for the economics, a number of companies in the past, mine for one when I was working for a company, have run semi-techs to produce enough for an industry to actually use, because they only need a few tons for that industry. So it can be economically feasible to do on a small enough semi-tech plant. So I think that specifically answers the question. I can't provide any more. I don't have any more that I can provide on that one. For India's question, I apologize. I have not really been involved in the actual reporting formats for HFC 23. I'm very happy with what you actually provide for us. It has enabled us to much better understand both the generation of 23 as well as the emission of 23 and what you actually use the 23 for. I think my only plea, and I think this will be a plea on deaf ears, would be I would love more information on the actual consumption of 23. Not a nice overall number, but specific consumption on the three major areas. That would actually help us refine our numbers. But again, I should stress, refining those numbers will be a matter of a few hundred tons. It will not actually close the gap of getting on for 9,000 tons. It will be nice, but nothing that will close that gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teep. I have a request from Haiti for the floor. Haiti, you have a question for the Teep?
Bonjour, je remercie le secrétariat de l'ozone qui a donné à Haïti la possibilité de participer à cette réunion en dépit des difficultés qui entourent la possibilité de voyage d'Haïti au Kenya. Je vous remercie. J'aimerais poser une question au comité scientifique et tenant compte de la durée de vie des HFC dans l'atmosphère et tenant compte aussi du fait qu'on n'arrive pas encore à identifier la source ou la provenance de ces émissions, est-ce que vous avez déjà imaginé ou réalisé les scénarios possibles qui vont affecter le climat mondial dans les années à venir?
Thank you very much, Haiti. I think that's a question for the SAP, so we will save that question for the SAP when they come back to the desk. I now have Libya, who also wishes to ask a question from the team. Libya, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I have a question concerning the HFC 23, but from the technical side or technical point of view, what we have in my country, we are dealing there with the HFCs, many of them, and some other of national or hydrocarbons, like 290, the 600A, and the 32. And all of them, they are flammable gases, and they are very risky for who's going to deal with this kind of gas. The question is, concerning the HFC 23, is it flammable like the others, or it's safe to be used as a gas in the refrigerators? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just see if there are any other questions? I'd like to close this particular part of the Q&A session for the team. Are there any final questions? I see none, so this is the last question. Thank you very much, Teep.
Thank you, Libya, for the very interesting question. The answer is that 23 is not actually flammable. It's a non-flammable gas. However, its properties are such that if you were trying to use it in a refrigeration system, you would only gain its benefits if you were looking for extremely low temperature refrigeration. It made, let's say, a bit of a comeback during the coronavirus crisis that we had, because some of the early vaccines needed to be stored at very low temperatures, and as such, a number of refrigeration systems were produced to provide these very low temperatures. I think these vaccines have now changed and you don't actually need the low temperature refrigeration for them. So it is a very, let's just say, small use. You're talking a few hundred tons a year maximum in the refrigeration industry for 23. So it is not something I think that will grow in the future in that respect. I would not expect it to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teep. You were released. Can I ask the SAP to make their way to the podium? There were a couple of questions that were raised by parties that the SAP might wish to just respond to immediately. There was a question from Canada about fence line monitoring, and there was a question from Haiti as well about scenarios in relation to HFC 23 lifespan. So perhaps I could ask the SAP to start and to provide some responses to those questions, but then I would also like parties to request the floor if they have any specific questions also. SAP, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'm joined by subject matter expert Stefan Ryman, so he will take the question from distinguished delegate from Canada on fence line, and then I will respond to Haiti.
Okay. Yeah, so there is, in fact, one fence line measurement has been done. It's done by us. It has been done in the Netherlands. There is a factory producing HCFC 22 there. It's quite difficult to do that. It's also quite intensive, labor intensive, cost intensive. So we had a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer of these instruments. Only about 20 exist in the world. 15 of them are actually doing the measurements where we estimate emissions globally. So it would be a really difficult task to do that in this way. So we have to be inventive if we go this route. We have to have new measurement systems, drones, easy instruments, which doesn't exist at the moment. So therefore, we have to do some research there as well. But it would be possible, but also it's not available right now at the moment.
So turning to the question from Haiti, and also a question, I think there was one from Tunisia that was related on possible scenarios of HFCs. Yes, they will be in the 2026 assessment report. There you will see projections, scenarios both including actions taken under Kigali and projections for the atmospheric oxidation from the increasing emissions of HFOs up to 2100. What we see from that is that those atmospheric oxidation contributions are very, very low compared to the emissions associated with HCFC 22 production. So you will maybe see some of that more highlighted results next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, SAP, for responses to those questions asked by Tunisia, Canada, and Haiti. Are there any other questions for the SAP? We will get started with the European Union. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As the EU takes the floor for the first time at this meeting, I would like to start by thanking the government of Kenya, as well as UNEP, for hosting the meeting in this wonderful place. I wish the co-chairs good luck during this meeting. I would also like to thank the Secretariat for their excellent work in helping us parties. But today, I also would like to thank the Executive Secretary for her kind words on the unexpected passing of Cornelius Wijn, as well as all of you for your warm words in the corridors. Cornelius was a great friend of the protocol. He was proud of its achievement and loved to work with you, making a difference.
Yes, and turning to questions for the SAP. First question, two rather discrete questions. The first would be from the data and the attribution of emissions and regional emissions. Do you have any indications if these are point sources of pollutions or if it's rather a wider diffuse pollution issue? And if it's point sources, what could we do to locate and quantify these point sources better? And I heard the previous answer of newer technologies being expensive, but how about things such as flash sampling at the fence? Would that be a possibility at the facility level, for instance, where things are suspected, if it is a point source issue? That would be the first question. And a second question would be, we saw that We have 40% more or less attributed to Eastern China, another 2 to 3% to some other regions. Then there were a number of regions, countries identified where we don't have any knowledge. At a previous workshop, we thought there was data available for the US, and we are wondering for the United States. So we're wondering why this data was not presented here today by the SAP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, European Union. I will take a couple of other questions. I see that Cameroon has asked for the floor. Cameroon.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Since Cameroon delegation is taking the floor for the first time, we want to thank the Secretariat for organizing this occasion, this MOP, and also the hospitality received so far from the Kenyan delegation. I looked at the presentation so far from SAP. I discovered that they gave an overall global emission gap that ranged from 2.2 to 4.4. And I looked at the actual stations that were considered. I discovered that within the presentation or the stations considered that they carry out these emissions, I did not see anything coming from the whole region of Africa. And I want to maybe link these same questions with what the EU just said. If at all it's actually point pollution, what the situation that we have in the case of Africa could not be a region that we need actually call it atmospheric control station to help us know what is happening within the continent of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. On my list now, I have Canada and Argentina. So I turn to Canada first.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and as I did with the TEEP, I'd like to first of all thank the SAP for its report. We felt that the information was very well presented and very clear. It was useful to have also the information of HFC 23 emissions per regions and countries where that was available. And we noted that there was then a comparison that was made with the HFC 23 that was reported by these same countries and regions. And we were just wondering, is this a fair comparison to make, in the sense that do the emissions that are measured over specific countries or regions, do we assume that these emissions are only from that country or regions, or could they include emissions from other regions and countries that have traveled through winds to that country or region? So it's just to know to what extent, we can link these regional emissions to the actual regions and countries that are being targeted, or inversely, could they include? Do they capture emissions from all the regions or the country? So if we have something, from Eastern China or Northwestern Europe, are we confident that those capture all or the majority of the emissions? Because or else perhaps the comparison, could be qualified in terms of to what extent we can make use of that. So that's basically my question, and I hope that it's understandable. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. We will rely on the SAP to interpret your question. We will get the question or questions from Argentina, and then we'll turn to the SAP. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora Co-Chair. Y quisiéramos, como es la primera vez que tomamos la palabra, agradecer a la Secretaría por la organización de la reunión y de los documentos, así como al Gobierno de Kenia por la recepción en la ciudad de Nairobi, que nos recibe con este clima ciertamente hermoso. Y respecto de las consultas, en primer lugar nos gustaría agradecer a los dos paneles por la presentación que realizaron, y con respecto a las consultas específicas para lo que es el SAP, puntualmente vemos que la gran divergencia o el gap que se genera entre las detecciones derivadas de la atmósfera y las expectativas en base a los reportes inician en 2016, 2015-2016, pero entendemos que la gran parte de los reportes de emisiones o de generación de 23 vienen, digamos, posterior a esa fecha, por lo cual la consulta puntual es si estos reportes están surgiendo en base a una derivación de la producción de 22 que se debía reducir o alguna otra fuente. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Argentina. We will turn to the SAP now for responses to the questions from the EU, Cameroon, Canada and Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take, first of all, the second question from the EU, which was, is there data available from the US? There is preliminary data available. It's not yet published. We hope when Steve Monster gets some time, he will be able to publish that data. So we would hope to see that in next year's presentation. I will turn to my colleague Stefan Ryman on the point sources, and he can also take the question from Cameroon. And then I will come back to the question from Canada. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. Actually the idea of using flask sampling, that would be a possibility, definitely, but you still need a gas chromatograph in the end. No, it's not only the flask sampling, and you would need quite a lot of flasks once a day at least, I would say, and depending on how the factory is working. So, but also that would definitely be a possibility. It wouldn't be that cheap, but yes, we could think of that if we would like to go in this direction. Yes, and Cameroon, new stations in Africa. We know that there are not too many stations doing air pollution measurements, greenhouse gas measurements in Africa. There is actually just one station right now. It has been newly built in Rwanda, where we measure this fluorinated carbon CFCs and HFCs. And so we are really looking forward to use this data in the future to do also some regional estimates in Africa. There is also an additional project initialized by Cornelius Rhein to have new stations around the world, and also there's a discussion ongoing at the moment where the station should be, and yes, that could be another possibility.
Turning to the question from Canada, who asked how confident can we be that these atmospheric-derived country emissions are really just from that country alone and not from other regions. I don't have a specific answer on exactly how confident we are, and maybe we can return to that question, but I would say that the models used to come up with these emissions are well developed, rely on weather models as well that continually improve over time. So I would say we are confident. We can come back perhaps to the exact level of confidence later. And then there was a question from Argentina who referred to the larger gap after 2015. I would say that the sensitivities to various regions have not changed after 2015 because the atmospheric monitoring sites used to derive those emissions data have not changed. So the atmospheric data on both regional and global scales indicate that emissions continue at rates inconsistent with available reporting, but they do not at the moment provide an insight into why those emissions continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On my list now, I have Guinea and Argentina. Guinea, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la coprésidente. Comme c'est la première fois que nous prenons la parole, je commencerai par remercier d'abord le gouvernement de Kenya pour l'accueil chaleureux et remercier sincèrement le secrétariat de l'ozone par rapport à l'organisation de la MOP37. Ensuite, mes remerciements vont à l'endroit du TEAP par rapport à la brillante présentation. Je voudrais connaître juste un petit éclaircissement. Nous savons bien que le HFC 23 est principalement un sous-produit de la production de certains réfrigérants, tels que le HFC 22 et le téflon. Mais nous remarquons à date, depuis un certain moment, que la production de HFC 22 a été complètement arrêtée. Et les téflons à date sont utilisés comme des revêtements anti-adhésifs. Alors, si en 2020, dans votre présentation, vous avez dit que les émissions étaient de l'ordre de 260 tonnes, et un peu plus dans les années 2025, nous remarquons qu'on se retrouve à 1 600 000 tonnes. Donc, mon problème à ce niveau, c'est que je ne comprends pas. Il y a deux sources principales. La première source a été complètement arrêtée. Et la deuxième source continue à être utilisée comme étant des revêtements adhésifs. Donc, comment se fait-il que la production ou les émissions peuvent augmenter de 260 à 1600 tonnes à date? Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Guinea. I now have Argentina, perhaps with a restatement of your question, followed by Senegal. Argentina, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora copresidente, y perdón por tomar nuevamente la palabra, pero nos gustaría hacer una pregunta de seguimiento a nuestra pregunta anterior. La pregunta se refiere a que en los cuadros de reporte de SAP se menciona que la expectativa en base a los reportes decrece sustantivamente a partir de 2015, mientras que los reportes públicos que hay en la Secretaría del Ozono recién empiezan a partir de 2019. Entonces, esos reportes que supuestamente decrecen sustantivamente desde 2015, entendemos que vienen de otra fuente que podría llegar a ser en base a la producción de 22 y a partir de eso una extrapolación de los datos. Nuestra duda es justamente de dónde se supone esa expectativa de reducción basada en los reportes para esos años donde no hay reporte oficial en la Secretaría del Ozono. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Argentina. And then I give the floor now to Senegal.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Puisque cette délégation prend la parole pour la première fois, nous souhaiterons remercier le secrétariat pour les arrangements et l'organisation de cette réunion, et aussi au Kenya pour l'hospitalité que nous connaissons tous. Nous en profitons aussi pour présenter nos condoléances, et nous le ferons à la famille de Cornelius, qui était un très bon ami, grand négociateur. Je voudrais revenir sur le HCFC 23 et continuer la question de la Guinée sur la tendance de 260 tonnes à 1200. Donc, cette augmentation des HCFC nous inquiète parce que le CDM, le mécanisme pour le développement propre, qui a un peu été estompé par l'accord de Paris et qui est arrêté autour de 2015, doit entraîner normalement la réduction de HCFC 23. Mais on se rend compte que la tendance qui est observé jusqu'à aujourd'hui, il y a cette montée. Et la seule qui est mentionnée correspond à l'apparition d'un écart. D'augmentation de ces réductions dans les pays article 5. Ce qui laisse supposer que les réductions d'émissions sont peut-être n'ont peut-être pas augmenté comme c'est annoncé. Et nous aimerions bien demander s'il existe d'autres tendances qui correspondent qui justifient donc cet écart. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Senegal. Can I turn back to the SAP to respond to those questions?
Okay, I just take the question from Guinea. In principle, it's a deep question, but I'm really an expert in that as well. So the thing is, HCFC 22 has been used quite a lot for air conditioners, so emissive uses, but also in a growing amount, it's now used as a feedstock for the PTFE production, Teflon production. And this production of feedstock has took over from the emissive uses, the air conditioners, and is now the overwhelming part of the HCFC 22 production. The rest for the air conditioner will slowly being phased out now. But the feedstock production is not restricted, and so that will just depend on the market then.
Thank you, Senegal, for the question. As I said when I actually spoke, the CDM stopped in 2015, and you associated it, as you said quite rightly, normally when you stop something, you actually see a decrease. The atmospheric measurement showed us an increase in the levels of 23 entering the atmosphere at that point of time. The issue that I think I should just say is that the CDM actually destroyed the 23. That was what the credits were generated from the destruction of the 23 under the scheme itself. Therefore, our assumption that once the CDM stopped, there was no incentive to actually continue to destroy the 23, and hence the 23 in the atmosphere at that point of time increased rather than decreased, which is, I believe, what you were suggesting. Thank you.
And the final question from Argentina, I think refers to, was it why the reporting-based expectations decrease in 2015? Was that the question? Oh, yes. I mean, this is due to, obviously, abatement happening at that time. So I think further questions on why the reporting-based expectations changed are probably best directed at TEEP, were clarified, perhaps, in that report. Am I right in thinking that was the question?
Thank you very much. I have a couple of delegations wishing to take the floor now, but I'd like to see if Argentina is satisfied with the question or the answer? It seems there might be further elucidation needed.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. Just to say, I don't know if that was the answer, but we see that there is a decrease in the reporting-based expectation from 2015 and on. But actually, you only have based on reporting expectation from 2019 based on the information that the Ozone Secretariat has. So where is the 2015, 2019 information from report base coming from? Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. I think that question is clear now. So thank you for doing that in English. We apologize for that. I will turn to the other delegates that have asked for the floor, which are the United States, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal. But if any other delegates wish to ask the SAP some questions, please make your intentions known soon, as I'd like to close this session out. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. And just to express our sincere appreciation to the SAP for this further study. Listen, I think this report tells us the same story we've now heard for multiple meetings, and I think this body's going to have to do some thinking about how many years we need to discuss this before we recognize we have a problem. But I'll come back to that later. A few specific questions on the report. So I think the first one's a very quick one, but I think it was the very first graph that the SAP put up showed the northern and southern hemisphere average concentrations. So when we read that, it appears to us that this is predominantly an issue of emissions from the northern hemisphere, which is not particularly surprising, but maybe if the SAP could just confirm that that's accurate. A second comment, maybe this is related actually both to the SAP and the TEEP, but with respect to what went on with the CDM credits, we largely agree with the points that were mentioned earlier. The one thing that I will say is that our understanding is that the change in that crediting did not happen instantaneously in a single year, that the projects actually came offline over several years, and so it was not in a single year, but a pretty quick reduction over several years as it pertained to different projects that were compensating for HFC 23 destruction. And I just say that in the context of when you think about how some of the graphs look and the modeling looks, it didn't all happen instantaneously. Next, I just wanted to mention briefly our good friends from the EU actually mentioned specifically US data, and we heard in the SAP report, just to mention that there are parts of the world where we don't have inverse modeling, at the risk of making my friends from NOAA and NASA very mad at me. So that information actually has been presented in public, so I'm gonna venture to speak briefly to it. Roughly speaking, the inverse modeling, to be clear, for the United States of America, so just for the United States, ballpark, it came around with some pretty large error bars to about 0.4 kilotons per year of emissions. I don't remember the years, it might have been about 2017 to 2021. I would just say, SAP members from the US, I realize it's preliminary data, but if you're comfortable speaking to it or confirming what I said, feel free to do so. The bottom line is the number's about 0.4, which is pretty small. Our own recent estimates of 23 emissions from our own industrial facilities was about 0.31 tons. So our estimate, 0.31, but just recall, that's not all our sources. That's industrial emissions only, so our actual emissions would be a little higher than that. So I think basically the correlation in the United States is actually quite good and fits easily within the error bars of the inverse modeling. Now, I'm sure people want to see that on paper. As the SAP co-chair said, we hope that that will be published within the next year, and that could be presented in the report next year, but that is our understanding of it. So I did just want to clarify that since the United States was mentioned specifically. I do have a couple of very specific questions about Figure 7 for the SAP. So as I look at this graph, there's a number of things that this graph tells me. One thing I'm not sure I heard the SAP comment on. So the blue bars in that graph tell us what the atmosphere is showing us. The red bars show us what the reporting claims is going on in the atmosphere. So there's two pieces to this, right? Could I just ask the SAP, so as I read this chart and I look at the data between 2011 and 2015, the data shows emissions quite a bit higher than what your atmospheric measurements are telling us is there. So when I look at that, I simply wonder, the inverse modeling that you're doing, if you look at those, sort of those 5 years in there, it appears to me you're not actually capturing all of the emissions from China that are taking place. So could the SAP perhaps speak to that? So in other words, does that indicate you're maybe only capturing about 60% of the emissions in China? Because the reporting during that time frame is far, far greater than what the atmosphere, right? You're only measuring this part of Eastern China. You're not measuring all of it, but the reporting is a lot higher, so we only seem to be capturing a fraction of it. And if that's the case, I'd be interested to know then, what does that mean as you look? So you're trying to figure out what the gap is based on what you're deriving from your inverse modeling. But this suggests to me your inverse modeling may only be capturing about 60% of the emissions in China, just looking at that. I realize it's only a few data points, but I'd be quite interested to hear about that. So that's maybe one sort of very specific question we'd like to hear about. The second one is, can you just explain to me then what is going on starting in about 2016? So largely speaking, the atmosphere, so in Eastern China in this graph, to me there's not very much going on in the blue. So the derived estimates of emissions, yeah, they're bouncing around a little bit, they go up a little bit, they go down a little bit. What's changing is the reporting. So the atmosphere is telling us the same story year after year, but the reporting is telling us dramatically different things. That's all happening somewhere around the year 2015. So maybe it's a similar, so you probably heard me, I asked the TEEP, so maybe in 2015 some brand new industry started that emits, you know, about 10 kilotons per year of HFC 23. Are we aware of any such industry? Are we aware of, maybe the question to you is, are you aware of any other atmospheric chemistry, any other possible sources, anything else sort of in the gambit of all the work that the SAP does that explains this discrepancy? And the reason I'm asked it, you know, 2015, it's about 10 years ago. In essence, nothing has changed since then. All of a sudden, reporting bottomed out. The atmosphere told us nothing has changed. 10 years later, we have exactly the same situation. And so I think the question is, what happened very rapidly in 2015 to cause this discrepancy between what reporting told us and what was actually happening in the atmosphere as we now know? So I may have follow-up questions depending on what I hear, but I'll leave those 3 or 4 questions for the SAP, including if they want to elaborate further On the US data, I understand since it's unpublished, if they don't want to, I have given a bit of a preview of that, that those numbers are quite small and within the error bars of the inverse modeling. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think that the SAP will take the question from Argentina and the questions from the United States, and then we will come back to the questions from, to seek the questions from Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal. So SAP, you have the floor.
No, thank you very much, Argentina, for the question, and it's a really interesting question because basically you're asking effectively how we actually reporting by parties calculated the data. And the only answer I can give you is we had several sources. The first was we could get an overall calculation from the actual Article 7 reporting of the 22, as you're well aware. The second was that there was a remarkable wealth of data from the actual CDM reporting itself, and we used the CDM reporting where we had very precise production data on the 22 and very precise HFC 23 destruction data and hence generation data as well. We used that, but even during that time and pre-CDM, we actually had probably, I hate to say, about 3-4 decades of experience on calculating emission factors from plants themselves, from measurements of plants, but also relating, and again, you can say this is both sides of the same argument, but relating that to what the atmospheric measurements were. So we would have the emission factors calculated, we would look at the atmospheric measurements, we would actually look at the production, we would have various site measurements at the time as well. So it all came into generating a number which was then cast against what the science community were actually measuring at that stage. So that was really, it was sort of process that just improved itself as it went along as we got more data. And in fact, the CDM was a great help to us because suddenly we got a lot more data on generation, destruction, and hence we could improve our emission factors. So that was how we did it, pre the very helpful 2019 reporting.
So I will take the questions from the distinguished delegate from the US. The first question was around the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere data. Yes, correctly identifying that Northern Hemisphere data is about part per trillion higher, and that does identify that emissions in the Northern Hemisphere are higher, and likely they're a reason for the discrepancy. There was a question on CDM credits, but I think that could be referred to TEEP colleague as well. Then there was a question on the US data. That data is public NOAA results for the US. In fact, they're estimates between 2018 and 2021, not 2017 and 2021. The value of 0.4 kilotons is correct, but it's preliminary, unpublished data yet to be finalized. Then there was reference to figure 7, and it's true that the blue numbers, of course, only from Eastern China. These are Eastern China emissions only. We don't have estimates of HFC 23 emissions for all of China. And we don't know the fraction of total China emissions that the monitoring from any site contributes to, but we look forward to working more with China on this issue, and we know they have enhanced monitoring facilities and enhanced monitoring capabilities. So it's difficult to say, really, other than the region captured by Gosan, that Eastern China region, is likely fairly consistently characterized throughout all of those years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tepan Sap, for coordinating your answers to those questions. I will now turn to Côte d'Ivoire for its question.
Merci infiniment à vous, Madame la Présidente. D'entrée, ma délégation souhaiterait vous féliciter pour la brillante manière avec laquelle vous présidez nos travaux. Et également, comme c'est la première fois que nous prenons la parole, nous souhaiterons donc adresser nos cordiales salutations à toutes les délégations ici présentes. Madame la Présidente, nous voudrions, avant de poser nos questions, transmettre nos remerciements et nos félicitations également aux distingués représentants du GES et du GETE qui nous ont fait des présentations très claires sur, n'est-ce pas, les enjeux. Et l'enjeu ici, c'est l'oxydation de l'atmosphère. Et je pense que, de notre point de vue, le principal enjeu, c'est de faire en sorte que l'atmosphère soit dénuée ou du moins soit protégée de ces émissions de HFS 23 et de HFS 22 et des produits dérivés. Madame la Présidente, sur la base des observations qui nous ont été faites et des questions qui nous ont été déjà, des questions des États-Unis, du Cameroun et de bien d'autres délégations, nous voulons savoir, effectivement, sur la base de ces présentations, quels sont les objectifs stratégiques poursuivis par le GES et le GETE. On pose la question parce qu'on ne comprend pas bien. Nous estimons que, de notre point de vue, ces présentations devraient aider, n'est-ce pas, les États parties à obtenir une cartographie des zones dans lesquelles il y a beaucoup plus d'émissions et proposer des recommandations. Mais dans les rapports qui nous ont été présentés, nous n'avons pas vu quelque part qu'il y a eu des recommandations. Peut-être qu'il y en a eu, mais en tout cas, pour ce que nous a été donné d'entendre, nous n'avons pas vu les recommandations pour, n'est-ce pas, amener les États parties qui ne font pas de déclarations à pouvoir faire des déclarations. Parce qu'on estime que c'est sur la base des données déclarées qu'on pourrait, n'est-ce pas, tirer la sonnette d'alarme et prendre les sanctions ou les recommandations qu'il faut pour qu'on réduise l'oxydation de l'atmosphère. Donc, je veux dire que dans ces présentations, on n'a vu aucune part, les recommandations faites dans ce sens, et d'autre part, les recommandations aussi faites à faire pour amener les États parties qui ne font pas de données, qui ne déclarent pas leurs données, à les pousser à faire leurs déclarations, parce que nous estimons que c'est important. Nous avons bien suivi la question de Haïti. Et si nous devons, j'allais dire, retranscrire ou interpréter la préoccupation d'Haïti, c'est de se dire, quand on écoute, n'est-ce pas, le représentant du GTE, qui donne l'impression qu'on n'a pas encore atteint le seuil critique. Alors, à quel moment doit-on tirer la sonnette d'alarme? Parce qu'effectivement, est-ce qu'on doit attendre qu'il y ait un seuil critique pour que, véritablement, il y ait des recommandations fortes pour qu'on aille vers la réduction des HFC 22 et 23? C'est important. Alors, moi, je voudrais savoir, aujourd'hui, on a l'impression que les kilotonnes de HFC 23 qui se trouvent dans l'espace, on a l'impression que ces kilotonnes ne sont pas dangereux, alors que, Madame la Présidente, c'est l'oxydation de l'atmosphère. Donc, quel est le seuil critique autour duquel on pourrait donc lancer vraiment la sonnette d'alarme, alors que nous estimons que les 1200 tonnes de HFC 23 qui sont dans l'espace sont pour nous tellement critiques qu'il faudrait véritablement tirer la sonnette d'alarme et prendre les recommandations qu'il faut. Donc voici un peu, Madame la Présidente, les quelques observations et questions que nous avons voulu poser sur, n'est-ce pas, suite, n'est-ce pas, à la présentation du GES et du GETE. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Côte d'Ivoire. I think you've sort of answered your own question. You were asking about the threshold for action, and then you indicated that you felt we had already reached a threshold for action. So I think that is really a question for the parties to decide in terms of the way forward and if they wish to take any action. And I suspect there probably are parties here that consider this to be a very serious issue, judging by the number of very important and interesting questions that have come forward. I will leave it to the SAP to also provide some observations on your questions as well. I turn to Senegal, followed by the United States, and then I will close this session. Senegal, you have the floor.
Merci encore, Madame. Et on s'excuse de revenir. Bon, c'est pas que ce n'est pas clair, mais c'est plus pour aller en avant par rapport à notre première question et la réponse qui a été donnée. Parce qu'il semble que l'augmentation de HCFC 23, une partie en tout cas, se traduit par le fait que le CDM ne marche plus. Bon, maintenant, le CDM était un bon acteur pour la réduction, la destruction de ces HCFC 23. Maintenant que ça n'existe plus, quelle incitation devons-nous apporter? Parce que si on se réfère au climat, il y a l'accord de Paris, les articles 6.2, 6.4, peut-être qu'on peut utiliser sur les marchés et les non-marchés pour un peu revenir sur les destructions et avoir des crédits d'émission. Mais puisque c'est toujours en négociation et c'est bon, c'est un peu avancé, c'est pas encore très clair, peut-être à la COP de Belém, on aura une vue plus claire et définitivement mettre en place ces marchés-là. Quelle est la part de notre convention et du protocole de Montréal pour travailler avec le climat, pour que ces incitations-là puissent se faire, puisqu'on sait que nous avons des projets de destruction, mais ces seuls projets de destruction ne suffisent pas pour atteindre tout l'espace d'émission de HCFC 23. Ça, c'est la première question. Bon, une autre question, c'est juste avoir une précision. Au niveau de l'Afrique, on sait que c'est au Rwanda que c'est mesuré. Est-ce que la station de Rwanda continue toujours à fonctionner et quelle est la méthode de mesure? Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Senegal, for your questions. I think in relation to the first question you raised, that's probably beyond the purview of the SAP or the TEEP, because you were sort of asking about actions that could be taken, going back to destruction, the role of the Paris Agreement versus that of the Montreal Protocol. So I suspect that is not a technical or scientific question, that's more of a policy question, and perhaps one for the parties here to consider. But indeed, we take on the second question you specifically raised in relation to Rwanda. So the last speaker on my list is United States. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick follow-up questions, having heard from the SAP. The first, if the SAP could just confirm, I think on Figure 7, the red line there, is that total emissions from all of China? Maybe just a quick confirmation on that. And then the second one is just, I heard the co-chair to briefly mention, so the atmospheric monitoring information that we have here is the inverse modeling that is done from monitoring sites, as I understand it, in Korea and I believe Japan. But I understand for many years there have been monitoring sites inside of China. So maybe it's a question there as to whether that data is available and what the inverse modeling is showing based upon that data, or when that information will be available. Given that we have sites from inside the country, presumably there would be some useful data available in that context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. I will turn to the SAP when they've just had a chance to consult.
Thank you, Distinguished Delegate from the US. Just to confirm, yes, the red line is reporting-based emissions from all of China. And I'm going to turn to my colleague Stefan Reimann on possibilities for additional data from China.
Yes, just to say that there are data taken in China since about 15, 20 years. They have also been used for different publications, for different gases. So at the moment, there is just a publication which has been submitted where Chinese colleagues look at global emissions of HFC 23, also including data from China. And so it's a process then, and so we are in the middle of the process. But as Lucy already said, so there are new measurements which are slowly becoming available, and we really expect to see more in the next years, also related to the data and emission estimations from this country then. What was that one? Yeah, and then there was a question from Senegal about Rwanda, the Rwanda station. So this has been installed a year ago. So that's quite a complicated subject, and but data is now internally available in this A-gauge network where several stations work together. It will be published soon, and the data will then also be available to do regional emission estimations.
Yes, thank you, Madam Co-Chairs. Remind us, a question from Côte d'Ivoire on strategic objectives. We are responding, of course, to decisions made by the parties. We're not coming forward with research recommendations, so we look forward to hearing your recommendations in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, SAP and TAPE, for answering so many questions. There has been quite a wide range of very technical questions, but also some sort of broader, more more policy-oriented questions in relation to the CDM, etc. So I would like to ask the room to thank the TAPE and the SAP for their reports and for answering the questions, and we will release them and move to the discussion part of our session now. So thank you very much, TAPE and SAP. So with the TAPE and SAP released, I would like to open the floor now for any discussions or observations that parties would like to make in relation to this agenda item. And I see that China has asked for the floor quite quickly. So China, you have the floor.
谢谢主席。中方感谢 SAP 和 TIP 一直以来就 HFC 23大气监测和排放情况等方面持续开展研究，并向本次会议提交了关于 HFC 23排放的更新报告。我们尤其表示赞赏的是，与去年相比，更新的 SAP 报告在事实描述上更加客观。
I'm sorry, can you just wait for a moment? I'm not sure that we've got English translation. Thank you very much. It's apparently now available. Perhaps you could just briefly start again. I'm sorry for that.
Thank you. Thank you. 中方感谢 SAP 和 TIP 一直以来就 HFC 23大气监测和排放情况等方面持续开展研究，并向本次会议提交了关于 HFC 23排放的更新报告。我们尤其表示赞赏的是，与去年相比，更新的 SAP 报告在事实描述上更加客观，避免了可能产生误导的因果分析，同时对相关国家和区域的情况提供了更加全面的可比较的数据。通过对 SAP 和 TIP 报告认真研究，我们得出以下结论：第一，大气监测繁衍结果显示，2019年至2023年，也就是自基加利修正案生效以来， HFC 23全球排放量显著下降。值得注意的是，这是在 HCFC 22原料用途产量持续上升的情况下实现的 HFC 23排放量的持续显著下降。可见，通过基加利修正案的实施，在各缔约方的努力下，蒙特利尔议定书再次体现了它的活力和成效。第二，更新的报告明确指出，已开展大气监测繁衍的区域，包括中国、韩国、日本、朝鲜以及欧洲的部分地区，都存在大气监测繁衍排放量超出缔约方报送排放量数倍的情况，且各地区数据差异率处于可比范畴。当然，当前针对 HFC 23的大气监测和繁衍覆盖区域还不全面，特别是在某个具备较强大气监测和繁衍能力的缔约方，也就是美国，缺乏繁衍数据，使得以上数据比较还有待完善。我们非常高兴，在刚才的讨论当中，美国代表包括 SAP 已经提到，他们已经有了初步的繁衍数据。如果我们没有听错的话，那个数据是400公吨。当然，我们也听到美国代表提到，他们报告数据大约是300公吨，所以这个差距是相当小的。我们查阅了公约的网站，目前为止，我们还没有看到美国的数据在网站上呈现。但是我们感到很有意思的是，去年美国报送的数据是43.5公吨。如果以43.5公吨与400公吨相比，这个差距可能就不是很小，而是接近10倍的差距。所以我们也很有兴趣想知道，是什么因素使得美国在它的报送数据上，仅仅因为1年的时间，就发生了如此之大的变化？是由于他们根据繁衍数据对报送数据进行了改变吗？还是说他们的方法发生了很大的变化？还是说他们的企业排放发生了很大的变化？我想，这进一步说明了各个缔约方在报送数据以及监测繁衍数据上，实际上都存在着同样的困难和不确定性。当然，我们更希望这是向科学的研究和探讨，而不仅仅是对数据的操弄。第三，对比第36次会议关于 HFC 23的决定和 SAP-TIP 向上次会议提供的报告，我们不难发现，提交信息的缔约方数量和信息内容有限。SAP-TIP 报告更新的信息同样十分有限，在结论上没有任何实质性的变化。这进一步体现各缔约方在估算和报送 HFC 23排放数据方面，普遍面临着困难和挑战。国际社会对 HFC 23排放问题普遍认知不充分，对 HFC 23排放来源、排放规模、排放机理还需要持续开展研究，短时期内难以得到明确解释和明显进展。自 HFC 23监测繁衍和报告数据差异问题引起各方关注以来，中国作为最大的 HCFC 22生产国，特别是作为负责任的缔约方，自主开展了大量工作，尽最大努力寻找问题的原因和解决办法。我们已经连续5年聘请专家团队，对所有已知 HFC 23产生企业开展第三方现场独立核查。近2年来，中国政府官员走访大量 HCFC 22生产企业，与行业专家反复研究论证， 基于科学和实际数据，开展 HCFC 22生产设施副产 HFC 23排放核算与报告技术规范的研究和编制工作。该规范有望于今年年底发布，为企业规范报告提供指导。为从根源上减少和消除 HFC 23的排放，中国政府鼓励研究机构与企业合作，成功研发 HFC 23资源化利用技术。一家中国生产企业基于该技术建成投运全球首套 HFC 23转化 HCFC 22工业化装置，截至目前已稳定运行近2年，有望为彻底解决副产 HFC 23排放问题提供切实可行的技术路线。我们可以自信地说，对于 HFC 23排放问题，中国是花力气最大、下功夫最深的缔约方之一。不仅中国政府如此，我们的企业和学术机构也是如此。中国的政府官员殚精竭虑，为清晰掌握 HCFC 22副产 HFC 23工艺、管理、监测、排放等情况，曾入驻企业整整1周，开展解剖麻雀式的案例分析和监测评估。中国的企业主动请缨开展 HCFC 22生产工艺过程中副产 HFC 23水溶性研究，近1年投入的资金就超过125万美元。中国的学术机构以开放姿态开展 HFC 23排放研究，全球合作。今年9月，复旦大学、北京大学联合举办 HFC 23排放国际研讨会，与国际科学界、各国政府、国际组织和非政府组织充分交流研讨。在本次大会期间，中方愿和各缔约方一道，积极讨论 HFC 23排放问题。对于讨论的基调和方向，我们希望表达3点意见。一是，在缔约方大会这个臭氧大家庭团聚的场合，我们不要吝啬对缔约方政府、企业和学术界努力的赞赏，不要吝啬对自身和他人成绩的认可，而不总是只是看到问题，忽视各方的辛勤付出。二是，我们要有勇气承认自身认识和能力的不足，有勇气重新审视从前的假设，尝试新的研究路径，有勇气承认探索需要过程，需要时间，需要平静而严谨的科研态度。我们也期待科学界在发现问题、提出问题的同时，能够从科学角度提出解决问题的思路和方向。三是，我们要始终以善意、信任和合作的态度对待问题。HFC 23排放是全球性问题，且具有巨大的不确定性。各方应以开放心态，共同持续开展科学技术研究和国际合作，要坚决避免有针对性的无端怀疑和缺乏坚实科学依据的归因。考虑到科学研究和技术能力提升难以在短时间内取得质的进步，我代表团建议，本次缔约方大会如果就 HFC 23排放问题作出新的决定，应考虑到缔约方和 SAP-TIP 的实际能力，提出务实可操作的要求。各方应继续根据已有决定进行研究，分享信息。中方将与其他缔约方一道，一如既往地深入开展相关工作。谢谢主席。
Thank you very much, China, for your observations and suggestions on how we might be able to move forward. We are running up against 1 o'clock. We have a few minutes of extra interpretation. And on my list, I have Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and Canada. So we will see how we go, but we may have to carry this discussion over the lunch period. So I give the floor now to Nigeria. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I would like to thank the government of Kenya for hosting us in this beautiful city of Nairobi. And I also like to thank the Secretariat for the excellent organization of this meeting and also the preparation of the meeting documents. My delegation wishes to thank the parties that forwarded their current methodologies for estimating and reporting HFC 23 emissions from HCFC 22 production and best practices technologies to reduce HFC 23 emissions to SAP and TAPE. And also, I thank the two panels for sharing their updated report on the issue. We commend the assessment panels for updating the HFC 23 emission estimates with atmospheric observation through the year 2023, given an updated data from the previous 2022 observation. We noted with concern the continued increase of the global mean atmospheric abundance of HFC 23 during the observation of the gas through 2023. Also noting from the report that HFC 23 has a lifetime of 228 years and a very high global warming potentials. We urge parties to provide more information on HFC 23 consumption as requested by TIEP and continue deliberation on this issue towards finding a lasting solution. We wish to encourage the assessment panels to continue to support the protocol on the most effective way of mitigating this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigeria, for your observations. I turn now to Saudi Arabia. You have the floor.
شكرا السيد الرئيس المشارك. نظرا لأن هذه المرة الأولى التي تأخذ فيها المملكة العربية السعودية الكلمة، لذلك بداية نتقدم بجزيل الشكر والتقدير إلى جمهورية كينيا على كرم الاستضافة وحسن التنظيم، كما تعرب المملكة عن الشكر أيضا لأمانة الأوزون على ما تبذله من جهود كبيرة في إعداد الوثائق وتنظيم أعمال الاجتماع. تلاحظ المملكة العربية السعودية التقارير المحدثة والصادرة عن الفريق العلمي والفريق التقني والاقتصادي بشأن انبعاثات مادة ال HFC 23 وتثني على الجهود المبذولة والتحليل البناء في هذا المجال. وتؤكد المملكة أن تضمين معلومات حول استخدامات المواد الأولية في التقارير المحدثة الصادرة عن الفريق العلمي والفريق التقني الاقتصادي بشأن انبعاثات مادة ال HFC 23 يتجاوز نطاق القرار 36/3 الذي ركز تحديداً على الانبعاثات الناتجة كناتج جانبي وطرق تدميرها. كما تعرب المملكة عن القلق إزاء استمرار الفجوة بين التقديرات المستندة إلى الرصد الجوي والانبعاثات المبلغ عنها، وترى أن معالجة هذه الفجوة يجب أن تتم من خلال تعزيز التعاون وبناء القدرات للدول النامية وليس عبر فرض التزامات إضافية بالإبلاغ أو بالامتثال. وتؤكد المملكة على أهمية اتباع نهج متوازن يأخذ في الاعتبار الظروف الوطنية ويدعم تطوير قدرات القياس والتحقق في الدول النامية وتشجع الفريقين على توحيد المصطلحات والمنهجيات بشأن مفهومي الإنتاج الجانبي والانبعاثات ومواصلة العمل الفني دون توسيع نطاق القرار. شكرا.
Thank you very much, Saudi Arabia, for your observations. The last intervention we'll take before lunch is from Canada. You have a few minutes, and then we will either decide a way forward or we will continue after lunch if there are more interventions to come. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I think, first of all, just an observation. I mean, it is still positive to note that there has been a reduction in the gap between top-down and bottom-up emissions of HFC 23 of about 2 kilotons that we had already observed.
Just one moment, Canada. We are getting Chinese on the English channel. Please. Thank you very much. Canada, you may continue.
Okay. And this reduction has continued this year, despite the fact that there has been an increase in the production of HCFC 22. Nevertheless, it's still a huge gap that we have. It's positive that it's getting a little bit smaller, but we're still talking about a gap of about 160 million tons of CO2 equivalent. And I think we agree with the distinguished delegate from the Côte d'Ivoire that we're a threshold where action is needed. And in fact, we have felt this way for a couple of years. And we think parties have made valuable efforts to try to address this issue. And we think that as long as we have a gap of this size, this issue should continue to be on the agenda of the meeting of the parties. In terms of where we could go forward at this point in time, I think for us it would still be useful to have a little bit more clarity and understanding of the methodologies that parties are using to estimate and report on their HFC 23 emissions. We do thank the parties that have provided some information that is reflected in the report. In some cases, for some aspects, the information is quite detailed. In others, it's less details. There's sometimes only references to codes and regulations, which are quite complex. So for us, it was a little bit difficult, actually, to be able to understand some of these methodology. In other cases, we were able to understand them. So I think that the TEEP has to assume that we're not all that smart and maybe try to help us in explaining, perhaps with a little bit more layman terms, some of the methodologies that are used, particularly with respect to the estimation of emissions. We think that that's a key one here. And also not necessarily, compare the methodologies in terms of, which ones are better than others, but just explain how the approaches could differ from one party to another. And I say this not because we think that the discrepancy is primarily the result of a difference in methodologies. We think there are other issues that are causing it. There must be. But still, we think it's important for parties to have a clear understanding of how these emissions are being estimated and then reported, given the very large discrepancy that we have. And I would note that in several regions where there has been, where there is some emission monitoring, it's not only in China where there's a gap. We saw that also other regions have a gap, and perhaps some of that could be explained by the way that emissions are being estimated in some parties or regions. Yeah. Now, the other point that we think would be useful to have is for some parties that do have HCFC 22 productions and HFC 23 emissions, that did not submit information, it would be appreciated if they could make efforts to do so for the next report. In terms of what additional reporting parties could be doing, we're still thinking about that. What we heard from the TEEP today was that they felt that at least on the production and the generation side, they felt fairly confident that they had enough information. They lacked still some information on some specific consumptive uses, but they acknowledged that this would be a very small part of total emissions anyway. So this is something that we want to think about a little bit more. Ultimately, we think that it's important for parties to continue to further examine their HFC 23 emissions and their sources, particularly where there's discrepancies that have been identified in the SAP report, and to provide information, to continue to provide information to the global community on these efforts. I think we just heard from China some information in that respect, and we understand also that they had a very interesting workshop on HFC 23 in September, which we were not able to attend, but we understand from the information we received from people who did attend that there was indeed a lot of useful and interesting information that was shared by the Chinese government and the scientific communities on emissions and the work that we're doing. And just to say that we appreciate and we continue to appreciate these efforts by China. Finally, just to mention that Canada is working on a CRP on this issue, reflecting perhaps some of the ideas that I've just articulated, and we look forward to working with other parties on this draft decision, which we hope to submit by tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada, for your observations and for your proposal for a CRP, which we look forward to receiving tomorrow. I don't see any other delegations wishing to take the floor, and we are in fact out of time. So I propose we hold this agenda item open and come back to it when there is a CRP available to have further discussions. So we will close it sort of temporarily and we will move to our next agenda item after lunch. I just want to check with the Secretariat whether there are any messages or announcements to make. Secretariat, can you make your announcements, please?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Distinguished delegates, the Secretariat would like to make the following announcements. The daily subsistence allowance will be issued in room CW 110 from 1 to 3 p.m. Please bring your passports and boarding pass. The following amenities can be found at the lower concourse: Kenya Commercial Bank and Standard Bank, which opens from 9 to 4 p.m., and the ATM machines are available 24 hours, located outside the banks. Medical services are open from 10 to 4 p.m., and emergency services are available 24 hours a day. Prayer rooms for both men and women are located next to Conference Room 1. Hemingway's Travel and Post Office are open from 8 to 5 p.m. Food and beverage. The main cafeteria, Delegates Lounge and River Cafe, will be open from 7 to 6 p.m. Coffee stations are open until 8:30 p.m. Lost and found will be collected and taken to the security desk at the upper concourse. On greening our meetings, the Secretariat adapted its environmental management system in the year 2022, which commits the Secretariat to upholding and improving the sustainability of its meetings. Delegates can support our initiative by bringing their own reusable water bottles and lanyards from previous meetings. More information on greening our meetings and travel can be found in the meeting portal. The Code of Conduct on preventing harassment, including sexual harassment at the UN events, applies to all delegates attending this meeting. More details are available on the MOP37 meeting portal. For any concerns or to report an incident, please contact the Code of Conduct Focal Point, Mr. Pablo de la Cuba. Finally, please scan the QR code on the screen to follow the meeting online. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. Just before we finish, I would like to announce the co-chairs for the Budget Committee, Sebastian from Germany and Ryan from Malaysia. And the Budget Committee will be meeting in room 6 at 1:45 to 2:45 this afternoon. So otherwise, we will see you back in the plenary room at 3 p.m. Good afternoon and bon appetit.